It Chapter 1 was a huge hit, both financially and critically, and it has once again become a cultural phenomenon. I quite enjoyed the first film, and was looking forward to the follow-up and the conclusion to the story. So, now that It Chapter 2 is out, and has been out for a bit, I'm sorry, these videos take me quite a while to make, let's talk about it.
We didn't stop it.
Pennywise.
The clown. We can't let it happen again.
Also spoilers, full spoilers for It Chapter 2 and Chapter 1, but I assume you put that together. Spoilers. So, It Chapter 2 is not all that great, but also not all that bad either. It's somewhere in the middle of those two for me, but on the whole, I found this a bit disappointing. The best thing about this film for me, easily, was the cast. The charisma of the actors and their interactions make a lot of this film quite enjoyable, and the less good parts of it at least watchable. They all not only work quite well as adult versions of the characters from the first, but are charming performances in their own right. Honestly, the Chinese restaurant scene might be my favorite scene in the film, just because of how well this cast works together. Everyone is saying that the standout is Bill Hader, and I'd have to agree, he was both my favorite character and performance, but everyone else is pretty great here too. The child actors, when they do show up in flashback, are also quite good again, just like they were in the first film. Also, I believe they had to de-age most of the kids in this, because they've grown a bit since the first film, and besides one moment with Finn Wolfhard's character, I didn't notice it at all, so props to the effects team. Also, Bill Skarsgård is once again absolutely fantastic as Pennywise. Creepy and funny, and just a great villainous performance. The film's comedy works quite well due to the charm of the performances. The film is very well shot and visually quite pleasing, even if those transitions were a bit excessive at a few points. The thing about this, though, is that this is a horror movie. And as a horror movie, it isn't really that scary. And that's coming from someone who hates horror movies and is creeped out by films pretty easily. Don't get me wrong, it's not without good scares. Besides the never-ending jump scares, there were some surprising moments or some genuinely pretty creepy imagery. And the film is especially quite good at building up this sense of dread or foreboding. So the build-up is usually quite solid, but the scares themselves were a bit of a letdown. Besides many of the scares just being jump scares, and then there not being a hell of a lot more frightening to it, it felt very repetitive and not very creative with the manner of the scares. Because a lot of the time, it just boiled down to, here's someone with a zombie face, or some weird, gross, deformed face. And besides the loud noise and the flashing image, there isn't really much scary in that, especially when it keeps happening. Also, a lot of the effects weren't very good, and felt very cartoonish and kind of haunted house-esque. And hey, I guess in a way, that's a plus for me, because I don't really like being scared by movies. But people who love horror movies because they love getting scared, I imagine will be disappointed with this on that front. The thing is, I don't have to imagine, because I've talked to 5 other people who've seen this, most of whom quite enjoy horror movies, and they were disappointed that this didn't really scare them. I'm not saying there's nothing scary in this movie, there is some decent stuff. The old woman scene from the trailer is probably the creepiest thing in here, the Pennywise bleacher scene was pretty unsettling, there are some genuinely very well done scary moments, but a lot of it didn't really freak me out. Maybe that's also partly because I don't find Pennywise that scary, but nothing in this creeped me out as much as anything from that first film. And even that film I don't think is that scary. Even some of the horror scenes that I felt were well done were more interesting than they were scary, like the Paul Bunyan scene or the head spider thing. Also, I do want to say, even though I complained about some of the effects, there are some great effects in here, particularly some of the ones that are clearly practical, like the blood in the bathroom stall scene. I do want to clarify, I didn't hate this movie. I do think it's entertaining for most of it, and I did like some other aspects of it. I also actually quite enjoyed how weird it is, especially for such a mainstream property. The way it dives into the mythology of this world more, and has stuff like drug-induced visions of sacred rituals for killing this intergalactic being and all that. I know in the book it's way weirder, but I thought the movie handled that quite well. A lot of the time, explaining the backstory behind a horror idea can ruin it and take the frightening element out of it, like the mystery behind it is what makes it scary, but here I quite enjoyed the explanation and the weirdness of it and the creativity behind some of that. Again though, that plays into what I was saying about this movie being more interesting than it is scary. There are some more problems that I have with this film, like the fact that it's almost 3 hours long. It is way too long. It really feels like they wanted every character to have lots of screen time, and they also wanted to have time for all the child actors to be able to come back, and so they were afraid to cut scenes in the editing room, so this ends up feeling kind of bloated. Or maybe not even in editing, just in the earlier stages. Make decisions that would cut this runtime down, especially the middle part where they split up all the characters to have all their own individual adventures. Pair them up and have them go off together. That way the film will feel less overly long, and we get more character interactions, which is arguably the best part of the film. and man, did the middle of this film drag for me. Because it's not just some of the scares that are repetitive, it's the structure of this film. Once they split up, it's the exact same formula every time. Character goes to someplace they know, has a flashback to when they were a kid and Pennywise showed up and did something creepy. Then Pennywise shows up and does something creepy. And usually that's in the form of someone you didn't think was scary, turns around, and now they're scary. When you know what's coming every time in a horror film, it not only makes it less scary, it also makes it quite boring. And that's really when I started to feel the runtime. Despite some decent moments in that section of the film, most of it dragged because of that repetitiveness. I also felt this followed more horror cliches than the first one, or at least did so more noticeably because it was at the expense of the story and the logic of the characters. Like Bill going off to the carnival, or Eddie thinking he's really killed it and isn't gonna get stabbed in the back. Also, the resolution of this film's conflict felt a bit too similar to the first film for me. Like, Pennywise messes with them in the exact same location, and then they stop being afraid of him and defeat him. Sure, he's a bigger spider clown this time and turns into a baby, but it essentially comes down to the same thing. And honestly, seeing them insult Pennywise was not as satisfying as seeing them just beat him up. My final complaint with this film is mostly in the ending, and how much it treats itself like it's this insanely epic saga. And I know this is based on a beloved book, and people probably remembered the miniseries fondly. Maybe. But in terms of this movie, there have only been 2 movies. One's been pretty good, and one wasn't that great. And then this movie's ending is something out of Return of the King, or Endgame or something. And I'm sorry, but if you try to put this epic saga conclusion ending on a film that isn't concluding an epic saga, it comes across kind of unintentionally funny how melodramatic it all is. With all the voices of the characters reading out this pretty bad speech. And it didn't help that it was stretching out this already very long film. It was a poorly written speech on its own, but also given the context, I felt it was out of place and a bit self-congratulatory, which in this instance, I didn't really feel was earned. All in all, It Chapter 2 is a watchable film. It's quite entertaining for most of it, but it's also deeply flawed in terms of structure. If you're looking for really effective scares in this film, I think you might be a bit disappointed. If you're looking for a good story with likable characters, I don't think you'll be disappointed, but how self-indulgent the film is may get distracting for you, as it did for me. Not terrible, but I found this disappointing. I'll give it a 6.8 out of 10. So those were my thoughts on It Chapter 2. What did you think of it? Let me know all of your thoughts down below in the comments. While you're at it, be sure to like this video, check out my Instagram and Twitter at BHL_Hudson, check out my second channel where I talk movies and TV shows with a friend of mine, it's called The Poorly Planned Podcast, and subscribe for more videos like the one you just watched. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.